Hello. In continuation with my last recorded session on entrepreneurship development programs, I'd like to first recall what EDP is all about, followed by some of the curriculum topics, especially in the midst of some new emerging topics, especially in the midst of this pandemic, and also some a new type of entrepreneur, some new types of entrepreneurs, and then followed by concepts of entrepreneurship development program. This session is not entirely going to be about EDP, but we are going to divulge more into entrepreneurship as a concept in itself. So, what is EDP? EDP is nothing but programs meant to develop entrepreneurship abilities among people. So, you are an entrepreneur when you start any business program. That's a given, yes, but you need, some people are born with entrepreneurship skills, but they need financial leverage to stabilize the new job, or some people are basically good in finance, but they may not have the aptitude for entrepreneurship. So how do you uh, equip yourself with those skills? With these EDP programs help a person to develop as an entrepreneur. Even though you have the idea, the spark, EDP programs will help you further your career as an entrepreneur, right? So the evolution of EDP, like I told you, there's an historical part, and then the present scenario, how the wave changed, it was all about government, and the only the government and related agencies could support entrepreneurs, and now there are a lot of private agencies coming up, and as we'll see today, we are looking at much more new types of entrepreneurs as well, who are completely different from what we've seen in both historical fact and in the present scenario. Next is the objectives of entrepreneurs. Basically, the objective of an EDP program is to motivate or strengthen an entrepreneurial quality or entrepreneurship, to strengthen entrepreneurship. Because as we all know, entrepreneurship is the backbone of a country's economy. The number of startups you have, the number of projects that it all comes back to GDP. So how equipped the nation's uh, entrepreneurship is, how far along, how can the nation's entrepreneurship move along? That's entirely what EDP is all about. And need for EDP is, this is all about growth of the nation and growth of the regional area, or growth of even a smaller village. It might even be a village, but ultimately it is about growth, and it is about eliminating poverty and unemployment, because not everyone can be employed. Someone has to be the employer, and now the need has there's a need for employers rather than employees. So we are shifting in that dimension. So that is entirely the need for EDP. So the new topic that I would like to discuss today is entrepreneurship in midst of a raging pandemic. What are the real effects of COVID-19 on entrepreneurship? So, contrary to popular belief, most of you might think that entrepreneurship is a dud in the current scenario. There might not be a lot of entrepreneurship ideas uh, or entrepreneurs coming up during this pandemic, because all, as we all know, companies have been shut down. Most of them have been laid down. It is a fact that 70% of the startups have had to terminate their employees, their full-time employees, since the start of COVID-19. And if we take the timeline, the global timeline, I'm not talking about China in itself. If we take the global timeline, this pandemic started in most of the countries around March, and from March, nearly 70% of the global population, I mean, 70% of startups all around the globe have been laid off. And these terminations, we don't know what will happen to these terminations. We don't know when the economy will revive, because as we all know, um, Many countries have posted a negative GDP. Most of the countries in single digits, thankfully in single digits, like the developed countries, they've posted single digit GDP, negative GDP. But the recent news coming in is India is India has posted minus 23 GDP, which is very bad for our economy, and which is sad news for the entrepreneurs as well, because we don't have enough funds to employ into entrepreneurship programs, because most of the entrepreneurs, most of the startups, most of the ideas, most of the sparks, they need some external support, and that external support is now a major question mark in India. But there have been many entrepreneurship programs coming up even in the midst of this raging pandemic. But we'll see the negative side effects first before moving on to the positive effects. So, um, so we are all aware that all of us, most of us, 99% of us, all around the globe, have been in some way affected by COVID 19, not just physically, but also economically affected by COVID 19. And governments around the world have been trying to repeatedly test and stretch these entrepreneurship capabilities even during these pandemic situations to revive the economy. But they've brought in new set of rules, and they have announced funds and uh, sources of jobs and all that have been announced by many governments. And governments have also been trying to aid people with much more funds. Countries like Canada or UK, they've been supporting their citizens with a certain amount of fund every month to keep them along, to help them move along. And for that was done in India as well. Every ration card holder was given 1,000 rupees, but in the scheme of things, in the grand scheme of things, 1,000 rupees did not really uh, help our situation, help our countries, people, because what the media talks about, what the media always talks about, is the larger picture. The patients who have been affected and patients who have recovered, the death rates, that was talked about. And there have been many distractions in the middle, with the high profile people dying because of COVID 19, and all the politics behind that, all the controversies behind that. We've been divulged, the media is divulging more on those parts of parts of the economy or parts of the news. But what we really need to focus on is how the businesses have been affected, and how many business have shut down, and how many people have lost their lives due to this pandemic and due to the effects of this pandemic, not exactly because they were affected of COVID 19, but the after effects of COVID 19. People have lost their jobs, people have lost money. Imagine, for example, imagine a person who has invested some lakhs of rupees, say what, 40 to 50 lakhs of rupees on a startup during the month of February, and then there is a raging pandemic. Well, let's say it's a restaurant. A person has invested around 50 lakh rupees on a restaurant. It's a startup, it's a small startup, and he or she has invested 50 lakh rupees in that particular startup. And this was sometime during February 2020. And then the business, it is really good. As a startup, the business is really good, and it has picked up, and it has done spectacularly well all through February. And then there's a pandemic in March. uh, we did not have shutdowns in March. Not until March 22nd we started having shutdowns, and the government announced the lockdown procedures. But there were some concerns during the second, because as you all remember, colleges were shut down in the second or third week of March. So there were concerns. People were afraid to step out, and people were becoming much more cautious of this particular virus. And there were not a lot of people who were willing to risk it to go to a restaurant and eat out. So the effects of COVID-19, the after effects of COVID-19 started somewhere in March. It's a March, first week of March itself, and then the lockdown was introduced. Lockdown was introduced, and there were no restaurants open in April, May, and June. And post June, an entrepreneur, a startup who's in employed a lot of money, he's invested a lot of money, and then he has got no returns at all because there were the lockdown measures. He or she has got no returns at all. And then to come back into the game again in the midst of a pandemic, when people are not willing to risk it, this is a very difficult scenario. This is a very difficult scenario for a person with a very big business plan and around investment of around 50 to 60 lakhs. Now imagine a vendor, a normal vendor in our beaches, in our Besant Nagar beach. He or she might have invested around 5,000 to 15,000 rupees. Think of their situation. Think of what happens to them, because whether we are willing to acknowledge it or not, the people there, the vendors in Besant Nagar market also affect the overall economy of the country, and by it the economy of the world. Not only the people who invest 50 to 60 lakh rupees or 50 crore rupees, not only are they important, not only Ambanis are important, but also these people are also very important for the turnover of the economy. So what happens to these people? Are we really hearing about these people, or do we really think about these people? But I think this is a very personal opinion, but people like them have have fought their way out of this pandemic than people who have invested much more, say 50 lakh rupees, because a wayside vendor who is selling toys or some snacks, he or she has now invested in selling masks. The masks that we wear, they've started selling these cloth masks. So when we go out now, where we found a lot of snacks or a lot of toys being sold, we now find a lot of masks being sold here. So they have tried to tried to revive their own economy. They have tried to fight their way out of this pandemic in their own way, in their own path, in their own time as well. But the bigger companies, the bigger ideas, people with bigger ideas, people with bigger sketches, they are the ones who've been most affected because of this. But they've also tried to come out of this, because personally I know a relative who was involved in this plastic industries. He was involved in this plastic industries. He was preparing these vessels, plastic vessels, plastic utilities, right? And now he has started preparing bottle caps, the has hand sanitizer caps that we dispenser caps that we use for hand sanitizer. He has started to he exported a machine, specifically a machine for that from Malaysia. He had to spend a lot of money for that. But after spending a lot of money in exporting that particular machine from Malaysia, now he's seeing a lot of profit, because dispensers, those hand sanitizers are the rage right now. And when he shifted focus, it was a little shift, not a big shift, but when he shifted focus, he started seeing much more profit than what he was earning earlier. So this pandemic has brought out the entrepreneurship capabilities of many people as well. So people who are able to think a way out of it, people who have been able to fight a way out of it, have really emerged successful during this pandemic.